Hi, I'm Josh Sponheim with Sponheim Sales and Services. I'm here to talk a little bit today about planting green. We get a lot of questions with our cover crop business, how to handle green cover crop come spring. Primarily in this area, we're talking about cereal rye. There's probably about 3 different items that really come up every time when we talk with a grower, so we're going to kind of touch on some of them today and hopefully appease some of those fears that people may have when they go out and start planting green. The big thing I want to give some background here is why we need to make some of these changes, and one of them that we like to change is where and when we place our nitrogen. And the reason that is because of carbon to nitrogen ratios. Basically, as we add in a green living cover crop or one that has been terminated a day or two before planting, we turn that environment into a corn on corn scenario. As a cover crop continues to mature as well, we increase that carbon to N ratio, which means it takes more nitrogen to break down that cover crop material out there. As a rye plant gets closer to basically pollination or the seed head coming out, we're roughly a 37-to-1 versus if we terminate or are planting into a cover crop that is fairly small yet, we're at about a 26-to-1. And if you look on that chart there, you can see the ideal microbial diet in the soil to break down crop residues is 24-to-1. So those are some of the reasons that we really want to look at moving around our nitrogen out there and what time we put it on. So when it comes to this, we're not necessarily saying you need to change how many total pounds of N you are applying in your field right now. What we are saying is we need to change the timing of it. Ideally, we would like to front load about 25% of our total N rate out there and band it with the planter, either 2x2 with a coulter system or 2x0 where we're just laying it out behind the closing wheels on the planter right on the surface but in a band. Why we want to do this is because then we have less chance of that nitrogen we're putting out there being tied up as that cover crop decomposes. It is also more readily available for that crop, being it's only a couple inches away from that seed. So some of the ways we can do that, we have our traditional fertilizer 2x2 disc up on the top there that either are mounted out front, or there are some trailing models now that you can put out behind. A little more cost involved with some of those. Probably the most expensive one out there right now, but seems to be promising with a few growers that I've discussed it with, are the conceals from Precision Planting, where there's actually a disc between your gauge wheels on the planter unit, and that would definitely be at the high end of that cost structure. Versus the other one, to get started with guys, a lot of times what we will do is talk about just putting a tube mounted on that closing wheel assembly out back and dribble it either 2x0, or in the case of the picture on the lower left there, they are actually splitting it on and laying a stream on both sides of that row, but on the soil surface. If for those guys who don't want to add something more to the planter, the other way we could do this is use a sprayer. Self-propelled might be probably the quickest, but you could also do it with a pull type. Looking at going out, and we could either drag a tube and lay it right beside the row, or we could put basically a drop tube assembly on there with a streaming nozzle on the end and stream that right beside or right on top of the row, as long as we have a split stream going on top of the row. But this would be another way to put that banded N on out there in that cornfield and not see a lot of tie up from it. So, I'll give you a little real world example here. This is one of our fields, and it was fairly late at night when I finished planting this, and I ran out of fertilizer. And my tender was empty at the end of the field, and I wanted to get done that night. So the last pass, I completely ran out of fertilizer. And what I was doing is I was putting on 10 gallons 2x0 out the back of the planter right by the press wheels, and it was a mix of 5 gallons of ammonium thiosulfate, 5 gallons of 32%, which equates to about 14 pounds of sulfur and about 24 pounds of nitrogen. In that strip where I ran out, when we took it to yield this fall, we only saw a yield of about 188 bushels. versus the strips on either side that had that 10 gallons put on with the planter yielded an average of about 220 bushels. So we had a 32 bushel advantage for putting that 10 gallons on with the planter when we were planting green and no-till. This field, this would be about third year of no-till on it, and probably about the 5th year of cover crops. As you can see in the middle picture, that was this field at planting, and we had a good rye stand out there. It wasn't overly tall, probably about 8 inches high, but it was a good solid stand for us. Another item that tends to come up quite a bit when we start talking no-till or planting green or both together is how we handle the residue out there, especially primarily talking about our disc openers. There's 2 different types that we have out there right now. Basically, we have our offset discs, which would primarily be the case planters, where they have built into the framework one disc is always ahead of the other one. So we have a cutting coulter effect, a leading edge, that gives us the ability to slice through any residue or any root mass that we may have from that growing or recently terminated cover crop. The other one are our what I call our True V disc openers, and that would be primarily our John Deere and Kinsey planters around here, where those discs meet and come to a V and there's no leading edge. A lot of times when we get into heavy residue conditions or no-till, we need a leading coulter mounted ahead of the row unit to do a really nice job with the True V's. There are aftermarket options out there to convert those True V's into an offset disc type planter, and that's what we're running on our planter, and works really well. We were able to eliminate that no-till coulter out front of the row unit on our John Deere planter by moving to this aftermarket disc that gave us a leading edge. The big thing I like about getting to that leading edge rather than running a cutting coulters at one less piece of iron running through the ground, the other thing it allows us to do is usually back off on our down pressure. When we're running the True V in those no-till scenarios, we're running a lot higher down pressure, and which could potentially lead to more sidewall compaction for us. The third thing that usually comes up when we talk to growers about no-till or planting green is the closing wheels on these planters. For our John Deere and Kinsey planters, traditionally we're running 2 of the solid rubber tires back there. We would strongly recommend guys switching to some sort of a notch blade. We run the Yetter furrow, or the Yetter twisters is the ones we're running. There's also the Copperhead Ag furrow cruisers that are very similar in design that seem to work very well. For those guys running case planters, your 2 small discs back there that push the soil closed are usually a smooth disc. We would recommend going to a notched disc, which they do make, and potentially even if you're running 100% no-till with heavy cover crops, switching those discs around and pulling soil in to close that furrow rather than pushing it like it is normally. So those are probably the 3 main areas when it comes to planters that we talk about with guys moving into spring and planting green or no-till. We kind of wanted to talk about this before we even talked about termination, because we would still have time for you guys, if you were interested, to go out and purchase some of these products from your dealers out there and get them mounted on the planter before spring. So thank you very much for today. Look forward to seeing you in future videos.